Amara grew up in the busy streets of Nakuru, where life was loud, rough, and full of pain. Every day, she heard the same cruel words from her mother, "Yvonne, you ruined my life the day you were born." Those words cut deeper than any wound. When her mother wasn't shouting, she was blaming or hitting her, making sure Amara carried the weight of her anger. But inside, Amara stayed silent. She learned early that silence was safer than speaking back. At 16, she packed a small bag, holding only a scholarship letter and her broken heart, and walked away from home. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it was the first time she felt free. Life after that was not easy, but she studied harder than anyone. Every long night, every tear, every memory of her mother's voice pushed her forward. Years passed, and the girl who once cried herself to sleep became one of Kenya's best surgeons. Her name appeared on hospital walls across the country, shining where her mother once said she would never belong. People now spoke her name with pride and respect, but Amara never forgot the voice that told her she'd never be enough. She didn't rise to prove her mother wrong, she rose to prove to herself that she could heal, not just others, but the little girl she once was. Years passed, and life finally caught up with Yvonne. The once proud woman who walked through Nakuru with her head high now lay weak and pale in a hospital bed. Her laughter was gone, her voice faint, her eyes full of fear. The doctors whispered the news gently: kidney failure. Without a donor, she had only a few months left. It was the kind of sickness that eats away not only at your body but also at your pride. Yvonne had no husband, no friends close enough to care, and the family that once admired her now avoided her calls. The strong woman who used to shout at her daughter for being a mistake was now completely alone, facing the end. Then one morning, the doctor entered her room holding a file. His eyes met hers with something between hope and shock. "We found a perfect match," he said. Yvonne's heart leapt for a moment, until she heard the name. Amara. The daughter she had cursed, beaten, and driven away was the only person who could save her life. The same child she once said had ruined her life now held the power to save it. For the first time, Yvonne felt something she hadn't felt in years: shame. Her relatives rushed to call Amara, begging her to come, to forgive, to help. They told her, "She's dying, please, she needs you." But Amara stayed quiet on the other end of the line. When she finally came to the hospital, the room fell silent. Yvonne looked up from her bed, her hands trembling. The years had changed her daughter. She stood tall, graceful, her eyes calm but cold. She wore the white coat of a surgeon, the same kind she once said Amara would never wear. Yvonne tried to speak, but no words came out. Her throat ached with all the apologies she had never said. The air between them was heavy, years of pain and silence floating in the room like ghosts. Her relatives begged again, "Please, Amara, help your mother." But Amara said nothing. She just stood there, staring at the woman who had never once said, "Thank you," or "I'm sorry." In her eyes, there was no hatred, only quiet disbelief at the irony of fate. The same hands that once trembled under her mother's anger now held the power to keep her alive. Yvonne's tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered Amara's name, hoping it would soften her heart. But Amara only turned her gaze to the window, watching the sun dip behind the hospital walls. She didn't walk away, but she didn't move closer either. For the first time, Yvonne realized what true helplessness felt like. She had spent her whole life breaking her daughter, and now that same daughter was the only person who could mend her. The hospital corridor was filled with the smell of medicine and the soft sound of footsteps, but between Amara and Yvonne, there was only silence. Days passed like that, quiet, heavy, and painful. Nurses whispered in the hallways, watching the two women who shared the same blood but not the same peace. Yvonne lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. She didn't cry because of the pain in her body. She cried because of the pain in her heart. Every memory of her cruel words came back to her, every slap, every insult, every time she told Amara she was a curse. Now, those words echoed in her mind louder than ever. She wanted to speak, to call her daughter's name, to ask for forgiveness. But pride built a wall inside her chest. Her voice would rise and fall, but no apology would come out. She wanted to live, she was terrified of dying, but she couldn't bring herself to beg the very person she had destroyed. Each day, she watched the door, hoping Amara would walk in, hoping maybe she would still care enough to save her. But Amara never came. Not yet. Only the sound of nurses moving down the hall reminded her that time was running out. Then one quiet night, long after the hospital lights had dimmed, the door opened softly. Yvonne turned her head and froze. There she was, Amara. Dressed in her white coat, calm, graceful, with tired eyes that carried too many stories. The silence between them was thick. Yvonne tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. She opened her mouth to speak, but before any words came out, Amara's soft, steady voice filled the room. "You said I ruined your life, Mama," she said, her voice neither angry nor cold. "So let me fix it." Yvonne's breath caught. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at her daughter, the same girl she had once thrown out of the house, now standing beside her bed with calm strength. The nurses nearby stopped what they were doing. Everyone went quiet. One nurse peeked into the room, her hand over her mouth, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. In her hand, Amara held a pen. She had signed the donor papers. Yvonne shook her head weakly, whispering, "No, you don't have to," but Amara only looked at her mother, a faint, sad smile on her face. "I already did," she said. The room filled with quiet sobs, not from Yvonne's pain, but from her breaking pride. The same daughter she had rejected was now the one saving her life. And for the first time in years, Yvonne realized that love can still exist even after all the cruelty, but it never comes without cost. The morning of the surgery was quiet, almost too quiet. The hospital lights flickered softly as nurses moved through the halls, their shoes making light echoes on the cold floor. Inside the room, Yvonne sat on her bed, her hands trembling as the nurses prepared her. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying all night. She wasn't crying because of fear of the surgery, she was crying because of everything she had done. The years of shouting, the cruel words, the nights she made her daughter feel unwanted, all of it crashed down on her heart like a heavy wave. She had spent her whole life blaming Amara, but now, facing the edge of death, all she felt was guilt. When Amara walked into the room, dressed in her surgical gown, the air seemed to stop moving. Her face was calm, steady, but her eyes told another story, quiet pain mixed with strength. Yvonne reached out her hand weakly, and for the first time in years, Amara took it. Her mother's grip was shaky, desperate. Tears streamed down Yvonne's face as she whispered, her voice breaking, "I don't deserve you." Amara looked at her for a long moment, her lips pressed together. Then she looked away, her voice soft but steady. "You don't," she said. The words were sharp, honest, but they weren't said with anger. There was no hatred left in her, only truth. The nurses froze for a second, unsure what to say. The tension in the room was thick, but Amara didn't waver. She signed the final papers and gave a small nod. "Let's do this," she said quietly. As they wheeled Yvonne into the operating room, she couldn't stop crying. Every tear carried regret, regret for the birthdays she missed, the hugs she refused, the love she never gave. And there beside her was the daughter she had broken, walking silently, ready to give her something even greater than forgiveness, a second chance at life. Inside the operating room, the bright lights shone down, and Amara took a deep breath before the procedure began. She wasn't doing it for love. That part of her heart had long been buried. She was doing it for peace, to finally let go of the anger she had carried for so long. Saving her mother was not about making things right between them, it was about freeing herself from the pain that had lived inside her since childhood. Hours later, as the surgery ended, Yvonne's life was saved. Amara lay in another room, pale and tired but calm. The storm inside her was finally quiet. She had given her mother life once again, but this time, on her own terms. It wasn't a gift of love, it was a gift of closure. Saving the woman who once broke her wasn't revenge. It was freedom. When Yvonne finally opened her eyes after the surgery, the bright hospital lights made her blink. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Everything felt blurry, the sounds, the smells, the voices around her. Slowly, memories started to come back. The surgery. The pain. Amara. Her heart began to race as she turned her head, expecting to see her daughter sitting nearby. But the chair beside her bed was empty. The room was quiet except for the steady beeping of the monitor. "Amara," she whispered, her voice weak and shaky. No one answered. A nurse walked in, smiling softly. "You're awake." "The surgery was a success," she said gently. Yvonne nodded, her eyes searching the room again. "Where's my daughter?" she asked, her voice trembling. The nurse hesitated, then looked down. "She left early this morning," she said. "She didn't leave a message, but she paid for everything." Yvonne froze. "Paid?" The nurse handed her a folded paper, the hospital bill, completely cleared. At the bottom was a signature she recognized instantly, Dr. Amara Yvonne Foundation. Her daughter's name. The same daughter she once swore would never amount to anything. Tears filled Yvonne's eyes as she sank back into her pillow. There was no note, no goodbye, no explanation. Just silence and the sound of her own heartbeat. She had imagined that after the surgery, maybe they would talk. Maybe she'd get a chance to say she was sorry, to tell her daughter she was proud. But Amara had walked away quietly, leaving nothing behind except the gift of life, and the weight of guilt that would never fade. Days passed, and Yvonne stayed in the hospital, healing slowly. Every time she looked at the scar on her side, she thought of her daughter's kindness, and her own cruelty. The same hand she once used to hit that child had now been saved by her. The irony cut deeper than any wound. She wanted to cry, to scream, to take back the years of pain she caused, but it was too late. Amara had given her everything, and taken nothing. Not even a thank you. Late one night, as she lay staring at the ceiling, Yvonne whispered to herself, "She gave me life, again." But the words felt heavy, almost too hard to say. Because deep inside, she knew that this new life came with a punishment, one she would carry forever. The punishment wasn't death or pain. It was regret. Eternal regret. Yvonne touched her healed side and closed her eyes, imagining her daughter somewhere far away, working in her white coat, helping others, smiling maybe. The same girl she had once broken had now risen higher than she ever could. And as the night grew quiet again, Yvonne realized the truth. Amara had not only saved her life but also taught her the hardest lesson a mother could ever learn: forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes, it just means goodbye. Months passed after the surgery, and Yvonne's body grew stronger, but her heart never healed. Each day, she woke up in the same hospital bed where her daughter had left her. Nurses came and went, but Yvonne barely spoke. Her eyes always drifted toward the door, half hoping Amara might walk through it. But she never did. The only proof that Amara had been there was her signature on the hospital bill and the scar that reminded Yvonne of her daughter's sacrifice. She had tried to find her, called the foundation, sent letters, even visited hospitals, but Amara had quietly disappeared into her busy life, leaving no space for the woman who once rejected her. One morning, months later, Yvonne sat in her hospital bed with the TV on. It was just background noise, until she heard the news anchor say a name that made her heart stop. Dr. Amara Yvonne, the reporter said, has been honored by the President of Kenya for leading a new kidney transplant program for underprivileged mothers. Yvonne froze, her hand trembling as she turned her eyes toward the screen. And there she was, her daughter. Amara stood tall beside the president, wearing her white coat, smiling proudly as she shook hands and received her award. The camera zoomed in on her face, calm, strong, confident. The crowd clapped and cheered, chanting her name. Dr. Amara. Dr. Amara. Yvonne pressed her hands to her mouth, her chest shaking as tears filled her eyes. The world was celebrating the same woman she had once called a curse. On the screen, Amara spoke softly into the microphone. "This program is for every mother who cannot afford hope," she said. "No woman should lose her life when a chance to live exists." Her voice was steady, full of compassion. Yvonne could barely breathe as she listened. Each word felt like both a knife and a blessing. Her daughter, the one she'd broken, the one she'd cast aside, was now saving mothers all across the country. Tears rolled down Yvonne's face as she whispered to the screen, "That's my daughter." Her voice cracked as she said it, like she was trying to convince herself she still had the right to say those words. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had lost that right long ago, the day she chose pride over love, anger over kindness. As the camera showed Amara waving to the crowd, Yvonne placed her hand on the TV screen, crying softly. She wanted to hug her, to tell her how proud she was, to say sorry 1,000 times. But Amara was no longer the little girl waiting for her mother's love. She had become a woman the whole world admired, a woman her own mother could only love from afar. And in that moment, Yvonne realized that forgiveness had saved her life, but it couldn't bring back her daughter. Years passed before Yvonne finally gathered the courage to see her daughter again. Her hair had turned gray, her hands were thin and shaky, and she walked with the careful steps of someone carrying both age and regret. Yet that day, she dressed neatly, holding a small bouquet of white lilies, Amara's favorite flower. In her trembling hands, she also carried an old photograph of a smiling little girl with bright eyes and 2 small braids, Amara at 7 years old. She kept looking at the photo during her taxi ride to Nairobi, whispering softly, "I'm sorry, my baby. I should have loved you better." When she arrived at the tall glass building with the sign Amara Yvonne Foundation shining proudly at the entrance, Yvonne froze for a moment. She watched people walking in and out, doctors, nurses, mothers with children, all smiling and calling her daughter's name with respect. Her eyes filled with tears. The same girl she had once called worthless now had an entire building named after her. Taking a deep breath, Yvonne stepped inside. The receptionist, recognizing her from old photos, guided her to Amara's office. Yvonne's heart pounded with every step. When the door opened, she saw her daughter standing by the window, dressed in an elegant navy suit, confident and graceful. For a few seconds, Amara just stared, as if frozen between the past and the present. Then she spoke softly, "Hello, Mama." Yvonne's eyes overflowed with tears. Her voice trembled as she stepped forward, holding out the flowers. "These are for you," she said weakly. Amara took them gently, her face calm, unreadable. Then Yvonne pulled out the photo, her hands shaking. "You remember this?" she whispered. "You were 7. You said you wanted to be a doctor. I laughed at you. I told you it was impossible." Her voice broke as tears rolled down her cheeks. "I was wrong, Amara. I was so wrong. I hurt you when all you ever wanted was love. I came to say I'm sorry. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know." For a moment, the room was silent. Amara looked at the flowers in her hand, then at the woman who once called her a curse. She gave a soft smile, kind, but distant. "Thank you for coming, Mama," she said quietly. "I have a meeting now." When Yvonne reached out to touch her hand, Amara didn't pull away, but she didn't hold on either. Her assistant appeared at the door. Amara gave a small nod, and the door closed gently between them. Outside, Yvonne sat on a bench, the wind blowing softly through the garden. She held the empty flower wrapper in her lap and began to cry, her tears falling like rain. She finally understood, forgiveness might heal the heart, but it doesn't erase the past. Amara had forgiven her, but she had also moved on. And that, Yvonne realized, was the consequence she would live with forever. That night, the city lights of Nairobi glowed like stars scattered across the ground. Amara stood by the tall window of her office, her reflection shining faintly against the glass. The day had been long and heavy. Seeing her mother again had stirred emotions she thought she had buried years ago, anger, sadness, and something softer she couldn't quite name. She looked out at the city she had built her life in, the same city her mother once told her she'd never survive in. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let the silence wrap around her. Then, in a soft whisper, she said, "You said I ruined your life, Mama, but maybe I was the only thing that ever saved it." Her voice broke slightly, but there was no bitterness in it, only peace. She touched the glass lightly, seeing her reflection smile back, not out of pride or revenge, but quiet strength. Amara finally understood that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about freeing herself from it. The pain her mother gave her had shaped her, but it no longer controlled her. The cycle of cruelty that began years ago had finally ended, not with hate, but with strength. Across town, Yvonne sat alone in her small apartment. The night was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. She placed her hand gently on her healed side, feeling the faint scar beneath her nightgown. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, my daughter." Her voice trembled with the weight of all the words she should have said long ago, words filled with love, regret, and truth. And though miles apart, in that quiet moment, both mother and daughter found peace, one in letting go, and the other in finally understanding what love really meant. By the next morning, the whole country was talking about her. Newspapers across Kenya carried the headline in bold letters, "The surgeon who saved the mother who abandoned her." Her face was everywhere, on TV screens, front pages, and social media posts. People couldn't stop talking about the story. "What kind of heart does she have?" some asked in awe. "How can someone forgive like that?" others wondered. The internet flooded with comments calling her the woman who redefined forgiveness and the daughter every mother wishes she had. Strangers she had never met sent her letters, thanking her for reminding them that love can still exist even after pain. But Amara didn't seek attention. She never wanted fame, and she never saw herself as a hero. She avoided interviews, skipped talk shows, and stayed away from cameras. While the world saw her as a symbol of forgiveness, she only saw herself as a woman who chose peace over hate. For her, it wasn't about recognition, it was about finally setting her heart free from the chains of her past. That evening, she stepped outside her hospital after another long day of work. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. She looked up quietly, her eyes glistening with tears she didn't try to hide. "This," she whispered softly, "is for every daughter who was told she was never enough." Her voice trembled slightly, but it carried the strength of every girl who had ever been broken, every woman who had ever been told she couldn't rise. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to prove anything, not to her mother, not to the world. She smiled gently as the wind brushed against her face, and in that moment, she felt whole. The pain, the past, the silence, all of it had led her here. And though the world saw forgiveness, Amara saw something even greater, freedom. As dawn painted the sky in soft shades of gold and pink, Amara walked quietly through the children's wing of her hospital. The halls were filled with laughter and little voices, and every sound made her heart lighter. She stopped by each bed, greeting the children, adjusting their blankets, and smiling warmly at them. When she reached a small group of girls sitting together, she knelt down beside them. Their eyes were bright, full of dreams, the same spark she once had as a child before life tried to take it away. She looked at them gently and said, "You are not a mistake. Don't ever let anyone make you feel that way." The girls listened closely, their little faces glowing with hope. Amara smiled, remembering her younger self, the girl who once believed she was unwanted, the one who left home with nothing but tears and determination. Now, standing here in her white coat, surrounded by children who looked up to her, she knew she had broken the cycle. Miles away, in a quiet town, Yvonne sat by her window, watching the morning light spill across the sky. Her body was weaker now, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She closed her eyes, whispering softly into the wind, "You are not a mistake." Her voice trembled with emotion, as if she was speaking to the child she had lost long ago. Though they were far apart, their words seemed to meet somewhere between heaven and earth, a mother's late apology and a daughter's silent forgiveness. And in that quiet morning, both hearts finally found peace, one for letting go, and one for finally being free.